In this video, we're going to be talking about Aldous and Campbell, my favourite old lift company. It was Aldous and Campbell that got me interested in old lifts. Now, in the modern day, there is no small-scale manufacturing of lifts. Any small-scale lift company in the modern day is not a proper lift company. They're just installers, installing off-the-shelf parts. It's crap, it's rubbish, it's boring, and it's just pathetic. Small-scale manufacturing does not exist anymore. There's not profitable, and there's no economic reason to have small-scale manufacturing. And it's a shame, because back in the past, small-scale manufacturing produced some of the most interesting and most characterful lifts. Because often, small-scale manufacturing made quite different sorts of lifts, such as the little Pickering's home lift things with no inner doors. Those are very characterful, and those could only exist because of a small-scale company like Pickering's making your own stuff. A little company making their own little interesting, unique thing does not exist nowadays. But Aldous and Campbell were different, because they weren't making little lifts. They were making great, big, heavy-duty lifts. Their lifts were the best. Very, very well built and very heavy duty. They were awesome. And their lifts also had quite a creepy look to them, which made them even more awesome. Aldous and Campbell were amazing. And what makes them very interesting, especially to me now, is the fact they are incredibly rare. And by that, I mean absolutely incredibly rare. They are so hard to find in the modern day. And it's a shame. Unnecessary lift modernisations replacing brilliant Aldous and Campbells with shitty standards, and to be honest, if they'd kept the Aldous and Campbell, it'd still be going many decades into the future, and the standard will wear out after so many years and it'll be replaced again, so it was a stupid decision to replace it. But these were all at train stations. Aldous and Campbell did not have that much presence outside of stations, and it's because of that that's made them so rare in the modern day, because you still do find old lifts about, especially old goods lifts. They have more chance of surviving than old passenger lifts, but because of Aldous and Campbell not installing many lifts in the first place, that has just made it so hard to find one. And this is to the point where I do not even know if there's any working Aldous and Campbell heavy duty goods lifts left in the country. And that's just really sad to think that such a great manufacturer has disappeared of all trace from history. It's just really sad. So, in the modern day, what is actually left of Aldous and Campbell? And the answer is not much. They were such a great lift manufacturer and they've pretty much been erased from history. So little is known about them and so few of their lifts are about. I do not even know if any of their big heavy duty classic goods lifts still exist. Although I do know of a couple of their smaller residential lifts that do still exist in working condition. But sadly all of these have to some extent been modernised, which is a shame. But there are a couple of those about. Also there are still some Aldous and Campbell cranes about, because Aldous and Campbell started sometime around the early 1900s or possibly late 1800s, like 1890s or so. I'm not exactly sure when they started, but they originally started off by building cranes. And a lot of these old docks in the modern day have been turned into posh housing by the water sort of things. And often a couple of the old dock cranes are left behind as like statues, as like ornaments to show people what the docks would have been like in the past. So for that reason, a couple of Aldous and Campbell cranes do still exist, but sadly not in working condition. But what about their classic, big, heavy-duty goods lifts, the thing that Aldous and Campbell were known for? And sadly, while I don't know if one of these still exists, the company linked to Aldous and Campbell still have two goods lifts in working condition. And that company is AC-Condon-Mer. And this was a company pretty much linked to Aldous and Campbell to the point where there was barely any difference between their lifts and Aldous and Campbell's lifts. They are pretty much two different brands, the same company. And in the early 1960s, there was a merger between three of the most obscure lift companies. That is Aldous and Campbell, Etchells Lifts, and also the last remaining part of the London Hydraulic Power Company. The London Hydraulic Power Company produced water power lifts, which had an upside down hydraulic system, so a hydraulic ram moves downwards to move the lift upwards, and also had a counterweight at the bottom of the hydraulic ram where the 2-to-1 wheel is. Very unusual design. They also pumped high pressure water around London, so before the days of electricity, you could plug in your lift to the high pressure water mains to run it. By the 1960s, that was incredibly obsolete. I don't even know if they were installing any lifts by then because they were so outdated. And along with Aldous and Campbell and Etchells, whose orders were all disappearing, the last traces of these three big lift companies merged to create ACH in the 60s in the hope that this merger would keep the three companies going. But sadly, this did not last for that long at all before it got taken over by Hamden Champness. So, while I cannot show you an original Aldous and Campbell classic heavy duty goods lift, I can show you an Etchells classic heavy duty goods lift, which is pretty much identical to Aldous and Campbell, and the only thing that's different about it is the buttons were different. But the lift car is identical with that creepy looking woodwork, and that was what really defined Aldous and Campbell, was this style of woodwork, including the same woodwork on the ceiling. Just that look of that lift just reminds me of the old gate lifts at Rochdale, Margate and Ramsgate stations, all of which have all sadly been replaced with shitty stanners. But somehow, 2 of these lifts still do survive. I last went in these lifts several years ago, and I'm really surprised they still exist today, and it's just so nice that 2 examples of classic Aldous and Campbell / Etchells lifts still actually survive to the present day. I don't know how long they're going to last for. Even though these lifts are in perfect working condition, they're really heavy duty and there's no reason for them to be replaced. You know what things are like nowadays, things get replaced for no reason, but at least for this moment of time they are still here. So let's ride them. Only Aldous and Campbell left in the country. I don't get luckies for a very long time since I'm luckies. This is an ECM Etchells lift by Aldous and Campbell. They're the same company by the time it's got installed, well, pretty much the same. Wow, look at woodwork. It reminds me of lifts at Ramsgate and Margate. Used to have lifts just like this, so Aldous and Campbell branded rather than ECM branded, but pretty much the same thing. Such a well built lift. They replaced them with steward stanners. That woodwork, that is so ANC, that woodwork. Must be from about 1950s. The merge between ECM and Aldous Campbell was early 60s, I think, but I think they're pretty much the same thing for a long time. Buttons were different. Aldous and Campbell had blue buttons rather than these style buttons, so very different buttons, but other than that, it's literally the same thing as an Aldous and Campbell. My key is not long enough for that wall. Fuck. I should take my long key, but I won't be able to fit it in my bag. Even down to that detail, I remember. Platform. Dark ride time now. Oh no, no dark ride. ECM.
哪件感受？